This regular Medicine Hat City Council meeting of February 20th, 2024 is called to order at 6:30 p.m. We will begin with a moment for prayer or reflection. Thank you. The City of Medicine Hat acknowledges that we live and work on treaty territory. The city pays respects to all Indigenous peoples and honors their past, present, and future. We recognize and respect their cultural heritages and relationships to the land. We will now adopt the previous council meeting minutes. There's a typo in the agenda, which will be corrected. 5.1 is our regular council meeting minutes of February 5th, 2024. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, the council adopts the minutes of February 5th, 2024 regular city council meeting as presented. Moving on to item 6, adoption of the agenda. I would like to note that in item 10.2, Bracy should be spelled Brady. Any other additions or objections to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is adopted as amended. Any councilor announcements today? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Are there any items that any councilor would like to pull from the agenda for discussion? Okay, seeing none, can we have a motion?
I move that council adopt the consent agenda items as presented.
I'll second.
All right, we'll vote on the consent agenda. And that's unanimous. Item 9 is unfinished business from our January 15th, 2004 regular council meeting. First up is 9.1, Capital Project Grant Program for Nonprofit Agencies. And this was a notice of motion put forward by Councillor Robbins. Do you want to make the motion and I'll give you an opportunity to speak to it?
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button, through the chair. I move that city administration prepare a report on a potential capital project grant program for nonprofit agencies to create eligibility criteria for council's review with recommendations about different options for the amount of grant money dedicated to the program and the impact of any loss of investment income to the city.
All right, and I will give you an opportunity to speak to it before we require a seconder, just in case you have something to say that would spur on a second. Or do we already have a seconder?
I'll just second it.
Okay.
Get it on the floor.
Thank you. Councillor Robbins?
I'll take it that Councillor Timonowski is not agreeing with me then. In any event, I have done this as a notice of motion, as that is the procedure in our procedure bylaw to bring anything forward for consideration. I wanted to be sure to have this before the budget was considered. And as those discussions have yet to have happened, that's why I wanted to deal with it earlier rather than later. And the impetus for me in this notice of motion is that we've had a series of requests from nonprofit agencies for the city's assistance for a variety of things, whether it's a building related or equipment related. And we also have heard at this council a few times about historical decisions that were made, and I'm in no way criticizing historical decisions, but there was no sort of criteria or something we could look back on to truly understand what the decision was about and what the benefit was to the cities. We can often see the benefit to the nonprofit agency, but seeing it, what the city's benefit was a little bit more difficult for me. So having had a few of those nonprofit agencies come forward and request funds for different reasons, I just thought that it would be something we should consider as having a framework and criteria, and perhaps set aside some grant money to that type of grant program that could benefit people maybe outside of the stream of nonprofits we normally see approaching the city. We do have a lot of different people who do different types of recreation, assist, there's mental health supports, all sorts of things that we're not really touching with some of the grants that we currently have available. And so that's what the motion is about. And really, I don't have an opinion whether there should be a grant program. I just want to know if we had a grant program, what it could look like, what the eligible criteria is. And even at the end, I may well vote against a proposed grant program. I don't know until I see what the impact on the city might be, especially that last piece of the loss of investment income that has a significant impact to future generations of people from Medicine Hat. In any event, I've written notice of motion with our connection to the strategic plan. I'm happy to answer any questions about it that council may have, but that's the impetus of my motion.
Councillor Knodel?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I think what I appreciate about exploring something like this is the predictability that comes from putting it out to the community that there is something like this available. We, as Councillor Robbins said, may see applicants that we don't typically see, and it allows us to vet and structure funding in a way that is, like I said, predictable. So I think that I would like to see more information. When early on in my term, I had many questions about how we decide who is approved for this bundled funding that we give out to the community and who is not. And I think most of the time it's first come, first serve. Is the negotiation effective for both parties? Is there a benefit to both parties? Do we see it as being aligned with our strategic plan? And I can see all of those things existing within this program, but it being more transparent to the community that it exists and that it can serve the community. So I'm eager to see how this could possibly evolve.
Councillor Hyder?
Thank you, Mayor Clark, and through the chair. Maybe I'm not sure who to address the question to, but has this ever been, obviously, groups have come to the city prior to our term for funding. I'm just wondering, how is this handled in the past, or have we ever had a designated fund for nonprofits or grant applications besides the advisory group we sit on? Like, is there, I don't know if we need to reinvent the wheel, but is there any history that we could use? Or I'm not sure to who address that to, but.
City Manager Mitchell?
Thank you. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to throw it over to Managing Director Stouth for some background. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor Hyder. I can give you some information on this. We have pools of grant funding money, some you referenced, so we have grant money available for events and festivals, some other things through the community vibrancy grants. We also have a stream, family and community support services, so our FCSS funding. Those both have specific rubrics attached to them that are used to evaluate the grant applications and adjudicate them to make recommendations to council. Outside of that, we have sport and recreation user groups that from time to time through our Parks and Recreation budget, we allocate some money towards those user groups to do specific capital projects for It could be things like school ball diamond improvements, cricket pitches. I just about said fields. So those are examples of things, and in the past, we've tried to be ahead of the curve, speaking to those user groups about what they've got in their plans, and then we solicit that through survey and then bring it back and try to decide how's the community best served. It isn't a perfect system, and there is room for improvement, and so this motion would probably help.
Counselor Dumanowski?
Did you have supplemental? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yep, go ahead, Counselor Hyder.
Probably just to direct it at Councillor Robbins. So I agree with you in the process that we need to find something and how to do it properly. Would to maybe dovetail on what we already do with the community vibrancy, like something like that, where we would have for bigger organizations, right? You're talking maybe, for example, we gave Halo some money. Those kind of organizations, Councillor Robbins, are you thinking like Root Cellar, Women's Shelter? If they come to the table, we would have more of a, like a measurement like Managing Director South was talking about, so that we would, you have to meet these criterias and that kind of thing. Is that what you're kind of looking for?
Counselor Robbins?
I'm going to say no. I'm actually curious about a specific capital project grant fund. So we do have funding that's available through everything that Managing Director Stout has described. But what I'm considering here is there's a lot of times where we have nonprofits who lease from the city, and they have, let's say, a new roof requirement, or new windows would be more efficient, but they can't afford them, or LED lighting, or something like that, where it's going to make a long-term impact on their nonprofit agency. But it's not operating funds. I'm looking specifically at capital funds, which I think are much harder to raise by donation.
Counselor Dumanowski?
Your Worship, I actually am happy that Councillor Hyder asked that additional question, because I failed to notice or pay attention to the word capital, and that is a distinction. I was going to raise a couple examples, but with that being said, I guess I did second it because I think we want to get on the floor and have the conversation, Councillor Robbins, so I was supporting that. Interesting to task staff to come back with an set of eligibility criteria, or the creation of some, rather, if there aren't any already that are in play. My original thought was, how do we do that without creating a weighted or biased set of eligibility criteria? And I say bias only because at some point you're creating, in my view of things, and maybe I got it wrong, you're giving advance placement or higher standing to a certain set of criteria. I mean, criteria means there's a first, second, third, or an ABC or some order. And inevitably in the accretion of that kind of an eligibility criteria, we're bound to have be accused or challenged that we have weighted eligibility bias or something toward certain projects over others. Or it might be as simple as, you've applied for this already, you can't ask for another capital fund or matching funds or anything for a set of years. Maybe that's the kind of thing you're looking at. But my worry is that, not worry, but my consideration is that by opening this up, and certainly it's not a bad idea, we are opening the floodgates, if you will, to having maybe groups who have not otherwise seen it to come to the city, perhaps to do so. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if we have some kind of order or timing associated with that. But inevitably, I think, I'm just saying this somewhat guardedly, I think if it's sometimes in the past, it's as they came forward, it was often they were in dire straits, or the roof was falling, in danger of falling through, or this, the group would not be able to continue their legacy of providing, community support if council hadn't intervened or supported. And so, but now that we're kind of proactively setting ourselves up to create eligibility criteria, we certainly are going to, in my opinion, by doing so, create an invitation for many more to come forward, which will at least level the playing field, perhaps. Maybe that's the silver lining, but it certainly will be a challenge, because I see the amount of monies that we can grant toward those things being always challenged in the context of the budget process. But I will support it today from this standpoint of it being here, and if we're going to pay homage in any way or shape or form to setting up a future process, then this might be the prudent course forward. So I will support it.
I'm going to wedge in because I have a preliminary question. I was under the distinct impression that administration already committed to come forward with this when we were talking about capital grants earlier on in our term, about what types of information at least people have to come forward with.
Through the chair, I believe the request was for a framework piece on the capital grants, and I'd have to check with Managing Director Egert where that's at.
But that is different than this? Okay. Councillor Hirsch.
Thanks, Your Worship. And I guess that's where I was going to maybe enter the conversation as well, is certainly we've had our share of different applications to try and frame it in a framework when some of the issues that have come forward have been so different and has its own merits to try and I appreciate the commentary, because I've thought long and hard about this and I appreciate the motion, but to try and put some rigidity around it, actually, again, I'll borrow some of the conversation that mentions that Councillor Dumanowski stated, that it is somewhat of a, you're almost projecting a bit of an expectation saying that we will. We've had, quite frankly, this council's always been in a situation where we've listened in terms of some of the community's needs and responded accordingly, either for or against. The cost, quite frankly, because the ask is a potential amount of grant money dedicated to the program, quite frankly, that's the purview of council. We can decide, you've already witnessed it, $500,000 going towards Halo, that was a council decision. Whether you're for or against it, that's where we're at. So I appreciate the intentionality around the motion. I just don't know what best way to encapsulate and put it into rigid parameters that either reject people that don't have a normal application, or their request doesn't fit into the parameters. And it does indicate, again, I like the idea of that our nonprofits are absolutely driven to try and drive as much sustainability as they can without the, and I get that all the time, quite frankly, from nonprofits that say, geez, if you're gonna do it for them, then what about us? And then all of a sudden it just absolutely steamrolls. So I don't know, still listening to the conversation on this, and I'm not sure where I sit on this, so thank you.
Councillor Hyder, I'm going to come to you after McGrogan, as he's a first speaker. Councillor McGrogan?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I think the intentionality of the motion is right. We seem to struggle. Well, don't struggle. We have to bring up these decisions come up, and there's kind of not a framework. So I think I'd rather not jump to what it's going to look like and say go away and find a framework that still allows council at the end of the day to make that proper decision. So it might be a loose framework, but I think it's better than the way it seems to happen at times now, where someone automatic comes to the door and we're putting in budget amendments in the middle of our budget season for things that we didn't anticipate, and perhaps that could be part of the framework. So I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of having it investigated, and again, like Councillor Robbins said, maybe at the end it won't be something that I support, but I think looking at it from a perspective of how can we put this in a framework that allows us to budget more efficiently, that we're not amending budgets partway through the year. Thank you.
Counselor Hyder?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. And through the chair, I think I'm glad that I asked the conversation, Councillor Robbins, because I wasn't quite sure of, I think I was reflecting back to what Mayor Clark was talking about, the framework that Managing Director Egert and his team were working on, rather than the capital project grant. So two different things. Am I correct in that, Councillor Robbins? So just a question for you, because it's your, so you spoke about a capital project grant. Now, you talked about, now, would this just be for nonprofits that lease buildings from us?
Counselor Robbins?
Thank you. Sorry, turn my microphone on through the chair. I think that's sort of maybe up for city administration to advise us on, is like who would have the most benefit. Is it places that lease property from us or buildings from us, or have their own buildings and just connections to the cities in other ways? And I don't want to turn my mic on later, but for the sake of Councillor Hirsch, within the body of the note, is it a one-time capital grant program? I would like to explore, because each year we're going to have a budget and each successive council is going to need to decide how best to spend that budget. So I'm just talking about this year's budget, this one time, as opposed to an ongoing program, if that helps anyone.
Do you have a follow-up, Counselor Hyder?
Yeah, sorry. So, I would like to see more of the framework, I think, idea from Managing Director Egert. And then I just want to clarify. So, for example, Ronald McDonald House it has to be a capital project, right? It can't be in operations. It can't be a program. It has to be a capital. Okay, thank you.
City Manager Mitchell?
Thank you through the chair. And just a clarifying question and maybe some comments. I do think it'd be helpful if we could maybe go back. I don't want to create extra work, but maybe 10 years to see what the capital requests have been and the nature of those, and then also outline that. Also, where is the budget coming from? And as you mentioned, a one-year budget, Councillor Robbins, but we're going into a two-year budget cycle, so I would suggest that it would be the 25-26 budget. Is that accurate? Yes.
Counselor Robbins?
Yeah, we are going into a two-year budget, you're right, but it may be as a result of the inquiry and the report made that it wouldn't make sense to do it more than once. Based on I think that 10 years of history would be very helpful. I know that's work but we sort of see things on the other side. We don't see the decisions that were made in advance. And then, of course, we've made decisions ourselves without any sort of rubric or criteria.
Sure, go ahead, City Manager Mitchell.
Thank you, through the chair. Great, that's good for clarification, and I think that making sure that we know where these, not only what happened over the last 10 years, were they approved, were they not approved, were they on leased land or not leased land, making sure that criteria is in there so that you can make the decision. Thank you for that.
Counselor Sharps.
Thank you, and through the chair. So I have been wrestling with this one as well. So struggling a little bit with the nonprofits status. I just feel like there is other avenues for nonprofits to get funding, both capital and non-cap operational. And I feel like, you know, it's when Canadian Mental Health approached us, and it's a good example in my mind, where they were here this summer, and if we would have funded them and then 2 months later their doors were closed, we would have had a hard time explaining that to the taxpayer, and I do struggle with that. I also struggle with the fact that I feel like, and I could have this wrong, but I feel like we're sending administration back to find out how many people use Zest, if they used it, instead of, is there an option to rather kind of put a feelers out to the community, like a request for, like a call to the community to say, if there was a fund available to you at a max of 10 grand, how many would use it? And I guess I would rather see the community come forward and tell us what they're looking for versus us just doing more work. At this point, I don't think I can support this without further information. I'd like to see what we've done in the past. I am not in favor of helping someone, and this is awful, I know I'm a bad human, of fixing the roof when there is funding out there, provincial funding, and there's federal funding. I just think it's hard to look at the for-profit businesses that have no funding and say, suck it up. But we're going to give more to non-profits that still are eligible for other. And so I'm at a no at this point, unless administration can come back with some incredible data that says we've been supporting it this entire time, then I'm happy to eat crow and support it a little bit.
Councillor Canoto.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. So I think as I've listened around the table, my understanding is a little different than it was when I first shared my thoughts at the beginning. So I think that a one-year pilot project I would be in support of if the vision was for a long-term structure. I don't think just a one-off makes sense to me. I think there has to be a vision for long-term, just predictability's sake for both us budget-wise and the community. I like what Councillor Sharps said in regards to surveying the community. I had that in my notes as well. What is the greatest need? How do we, I mean, that data is easy to gather just from conversation or some sort of survey that could go out to our nonprofit groups about their greatest need. I feel like the capital grant funding option, it allows for, like we have gone this direction, or staff have gone this direction with nonprofits in the community already. We have shifted to a nonprofit grant funding model because it allows for the certainty that their buildings will be taken care of. But if we're not invested in or own the buildings that these organizations are functioning in, then I think we might be forcing them into supporting them in a way that isn't necessarily the way they need to be supported. I think there was one more thing. That's all I have for now.
All right, I'm going to speak on this. I'm struggling to understand, I guess, what the concerns are about creating eligibility criteria. We know for a fact that organizations, like within our term, there has been several organizations that have come forward with capital money requests and having eligibility criteria around them, regardless of whether we could, you know, we can always still choose to grant them the money or not. It's just, don't come apply unless you meet these criteria. I feel it actually narrows the scope, because right now we're operating on a sort of first come, first serve with no defined criteria. So, you know, if we give $5 million to a group and then the next day, oh, this other group in need is coming, but we don't have the money anymore. So from my perspective, this is a much more fair and calculated approach of determining who we are going to give, if anyone, grant project funding to. And whatever, like, to me it says develop the criteria and then tell us about options for grant money dedication and what impacts that would have on the overall city budget, including investment income. To me, if we're not doing that, it is basically just anyone's welcome to just come and present and ask for capital funding, and we don't really have a rubric or criteria around when and why we would give that money to anyone, which seems a little bit unfair and haphazard when we're talking about potentially a lot of money. City Manager Mitchell.
Thank you through the chair. I think we can easily incorporate when we bring the report back, if it's the will of council, that we reach out to the community and do a survey. It doesn't have to be extensive, but conversations with the various nonprofits. So that becomes part of the briefing note to council.
I will just add one more thing. One of the criteria, for example, could be that it's on city-owned land or it is a city-owned facility. Those could be part of the criteria. This is just asking for the creation of eligibility criteria that council would then approve. Councillor Hirsch.
Well, and that's where it gets a little bit, thanks, that's where it gets a little bit gray for me. So, you know, if you talk about property that's already owned by the city, that would fall under our maintenance, new roof, new windows, that sort of thing from a capital enhancement. And in fact, we probably wouldn't, it's up to the discretion of the owner of the building to determine if enhancements are made. Of course, the applicant or the tenant can request such sort of thing. That's where I kind of feel like if we're putting this in, that's where I'm not understanding. And then it also speaks to the fact that we are hereby somewhat allocating some dollars to this. And I don't know, you know, the one word that wasn't mentioned during our discussion is the taxpayer, from which I feel like there's a little bit of government creep going on here, that we're starting to become funders for different applications that come forward. And I get COVID, I get the whole circumstances. Again, my day job, I see a lot of people that were impacted. I think going back to Councillor Sharp's commentary, I've seen businesses that are impacted greatly in terms of some of the things that have happened. And my heart bleeds, but I think in terms of trying to stay, and I want to be true to myself in the fact that I'm a little bit more small government than the government creeps. So I think we've got already initiative underway through the managing director that's talking about making sure the information out there with our nonprofits that we have relationships with, that they have, let's call it their capital affairs in order. They know what they need. That was certainly the ask that I had, that there's no surprises coming to this council. And that was somewhat, and I can't remember if it was a specific direction, it really doesn't matter. But I live in the world of no surprises, and again, we talk about being in budget, and I just, because we don't know what's gonna come to us, then there's an how would you even decide what the allocation could be? So anyway, I just don't wanna be, and maybe this can come as an adjunct to what's coming to us as well. Anyway, I just feel like, I don't know if they can stand in isolation. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I did think that the framework was about also creating eligibility criteria. So I was a bit confused about that, but I think as I'm reading it, the funding is separate. So we have eligibility criteria. We can decide to create a fund or just use that criteria when people inevitably come forward and ask us for money. So I would separate the amount, because we're just considering options and we can say no grant. That's how I'm reading it. I don't know if Councillor Robbins, you wanted to comment on that.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair, I think I tried to leave the motion as open-ended as possible because I don't know if a grant program with a certain amount of money in it is going to be used by nonprofit agencies or not. My experience was, as we've had people ask for money here, I would have liked to have a better sense of what I was comparing it to before I made those decisions. And we've seen as I said before, the back end of some of those decisions that might have shaken down differently if there was a criteria. So yes, to me, the criteria and the amount of grant money, if there's any grant money needed, are two separate issues.
All right, seeing no further speakers, I will also just note that there isn't a date, but you did mention that you were hoping to have this before budget. Is that something you would like to remedy?
I was hoping to get some input from city manager if this was approved by council, what the date might look like.
Through the chair, we are having initial budget discussions in April. However, given the breadth of this ask, it's going to be a bit of work. I don't want to overextend staff, but I believe that we could get it done for early May, because we'll have to go back 10 years. One other thing, too, I'd like to mention to council, we just haven't had the time, but we are working with our various partners on trying harder to work with the nonprofits to help them, because sometimes they don't have the depth of staff or the knowledge base. And I know that Community Futures, we had a conversation a few months ago about maybe setting up some kind of 101 sessions to help them through this so they could understand grant writing, those kind of processes, what's available. That's something that we need to implement too and put on this report. So long answer, but I would say we could beginning of May.
Councillor Robbins?
I'm not sure I want to add a date to the particular motion. I know city managers, we haven't even voted on it yet, so maybe if it's defeated, then it's kind of pointless to have the conversation.
All right, seeing no further speakers, we'll vote on the motion as it appears on the screen. And that passes. Moving on to item 9.2, Downtown Enhancement Grant Program. This was also postponed from January 15th, 2024, and also a notice of motion put forward by Councillor Robbins.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'll make the motion. I move that city administration consult with stakeholders as presented, that's within the note, research innovative similar programs in other communities, and provide report to council of options to create a downtown enhancement grant with a goal, if approved by council, to commence the grant applications in May 2024. That might be a bit of an unrealistic date, so I'm going to change my motion to say July 2024.
I'll second.
Thank you. This is also something that I thought was already going to be coming forward to council. In terms of downtown incentives, we're not preparing new incentives for.
Through the chair, this is a different, the incentive piece that you're talking about through economic development is coming forward in March to Committee of the Whole. This is a different, my understanding for this was from Councillor Robbins' initial notice of motion that it was a grant to help people keep their outsides of their buildings and facilities clean. Is that correct, Councillor Robbins?
Yeah, it could do a number of things, but that would be one of them.
All right, I don't see any speakers. Councillor Sharps?
Thank you, and through the chair. So I did have one question when I read the stakeholders. So we list the stakeholders as Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Collective, which is a subcommittee of Chamber of Commerce, Medicine Hat Public Library, MHPS, DPU, community housing, churches, and other businesses and social agencies. So the other businesses seems to be towards the end. If we're going to do this for downtown businesses, I would ask that we actually engage directly with downtown businesses. I think that's where you get your best answers. But if you talk to a nonprofit about what I need as a downtown business, you're not getting the same answer. So, and just as an aside, I sit on Downtown Collective and Chamber. And the Downtown Collective is a representative chamber members that are downtown, not of all businesses. And there, I would say it's probably a 50-50 split of people that aren't on the chamber or chamber members. So I don't want to exclude them just because they're not chamber members. So I'm just, if this is going to go through, I think there needs to be a direct conversation with businesses that are downtown, city manager.
Councillor Robbins?
Yes, thank you, and through the chair, I just want to introduce the impetus behind this is actually discussion with business owners, Many of us have heard from business owners, from members of the community. We've attended town halls and discussed this, meetings with the chamber and discussed it as well. I was on the Medicine Community Housing Board until recently, discussions there. I sit on the Medicine Public Library, there's continued discussions there as well. So this is a topic that's come up in my work as a counselor many, many times. So in the course of those topics coming up, I started to look into what other cities did, how the city could support business in particular. I've listed who's essential to the research, including, of course, businesses and any other social agencies located downtown, but certainly didn't intend for any of that to be exclusive of the other, or by making it in a list to make one a priority over the other. So if that is the interpretation, that certainly wasn't my intention. I was actually just listing people I had heard from in sort of the order I'd heard from them. So, but certainly have spoken to lots of businesses downtown about the impact, even just walking into them and asking how things are going. I've also spoken to a lot of people in the community who would like to come downtown, but they are fearful. And so I wanted to explore possibilities of making a grant program that would make them feel safer coming downtown, and also to allow businesses, in particular businesses downtown, who have extra costs because of their choice to have their businesses downtown, to have some opportunities for funding that wouldn't exist otherwise. It does cost them more in security than it may cost people in other places. So the focus to me was on business, but collecting information from all of the people who live and work downtown is really important. And so that was the impetus, again, was really from feedback I've received as a counselor many, many times through the past 2 years.
Councillor Hirsch?
Thanks, Your Worship. So I appreciate, again, the impetus for this. It does harken back to the COVID response that this council supported in terms of enhancing online presence. There was different things that we did. Desperate measures call for desperate times, I guess. But I'm just wondering, again, there's an intimation here that we are going to provide a grant, again, which tells me new money again. And I'm wondering, you know, we just had this conversation about perhaps spearheading initiative of a community consultation with the downtown group that, and quite frankly, this isn't new. We've had this same conversation over many years. Some of it became the fact that the lights downtown weren't bright enough. We used the illumination of the gas lights, so that's part of the safety issue. I know we've got some new issues that aren't certainly prevalent in our day that wasn't there necessarily years ago. But I'm just wondering if we can't have that community conversation first in terms of ways and means that we can look to strengthen the resolve of the community downtown, and then look at, from that conversation, look at if there's means and areas that we can build upon instead of, and that's not the intention of Councillor Robbins, I know it's not, instead of just throwing money at it. So I think the idea has its merit. Again, I'm a little bit worried that we talk about grant application, which construes, again, new money. Again, when we already know, certainly we're trying to keep a tight line on the budget, and anytime we do any allocations, and don't forget, I say this often, 1% increase to taxes is $800,000, and that can be spent very quickly. So I just think we just need to tread carefully on this, and I'd support if there was the removal of the idea of a commence the grant application, because again, it construes to, it kind of tells us that there's going to be money in this, where I'd rather have the community consultation, and then as a result of it, if there is options considered that the only way we get there is through putting money towards a grant, I could support it then, but I just feel like we're getting ahead ourselves.
I will note that the motion does say, if approved by council, if the grant piece of it. Counselor Hyder? Counselor Hirsch?
Thank you, through the chair. I just, I'm questioning, I do see incentives offered through our medicine economic development team with Selena. So I'm not, what would be different, Councillor Robbins, than what we offer through our team with Selena, the incentives?
I'm going to refer that to City Manager Mitchell because she did comment on that already. Go ahead.
Through the chair, my understanding from Councillor Robbins' intention, and I don't want to speak for you, so you can jump in when I'm finished, was that you were worried more about facades, safety, these types of things for the various businesses to assist them in keeping their front of their buildings clean and whatnot. With regards to our incentives, and we'll hear more about that in March from Director McLean Moore, and she's up there. But the other incentives are to increase downtown businesses, those types of things, and those parameters are different than what my understanding is of Councillor Robbins' intentions.
So Councillor Robbins, you may both respond, and also your name has come up on the list, so go ahead.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you to City Manager for expressing how my intention, which she did very concisely. I think the most important thing to me is the consultation. That's why the motion starts with that. Researching innovative similar programs in other communities. I've given the example in the note about Edmonton's window repair program. If you're within a certain business zone, you can apply to get your windows repaired. So it's a little bit like our HatSmart program, but just a different focus. So I'm not really sure which elements of those work for downtown businesses at all until they're consulted first. So it may be that some of the ideas that I've put in here that I've in my research of other places may never work in Medicine Hat, and they've got a much better idea that costs no money for all I know. So I think that consultation is the critical piece. And how it's different than the incentives is that we can incentivize people to have their businesses downtown, but if our community doesn't feel safe to go there, their businesses are not going to be as successful as they should be. And so I think that they actually work together, just slightly different focus, but definitely would require a great deal of consultation to be successful.
Councillor Dumanowski as first speaker. I'm going to go to you next.
Thank you, Worship. I second the motion to get it on the table. I'm less clear about this one in some regard than the other motion, but some of the conversation that's occurred is clearing up for me. When I first was thinking about enhancement, other than the background information given, I'm thinking of some of the pieces that we're going to be dealing with and on the economic side, but I'm thinking of enhancement as in beautification or facade or redevelopment or development, new development, et cetera, but in the context of what is being communicated today and in the background, adds clarity. I don't want to say danger, but the danger of consulting and asking is that there's an expectation, certainly derived from that something will come of it. We all know famously from lots of different people and groups over our lifetimes, I'm sure, where if you're going to ask, be prepared to hear, and if you're going to hear, be prepared to act and do. So this does, if it's passed, does give impetus for that. How much, how, again, we're talking about eligibility, what would that be if you're a bank and your window's broken? We hear about it all the time. Do the banks get some the community's funds to repair a window, or are we talking about small business? Are we talking about social service? There's just some specifics that I would want to understand better out of this, and certainly the goal here is to identify that. But when it comes to security, adding cameras, as one said before, it really, in the end, it allows the business person or resident to feel more, create some I guess, controls over who is around their business or their residents. And so, but does it in the end enhance literally, figuratively, otherwise, their business practice? Probably not, but, and on it goes. I could cite a number of small examples that probably wouldn't move this narrative any forward more than it has. But I will support it only because I think consulting with our stakeholders downtown is always a prudent activity. Since we've lost our downtown business revitalization zone group, we have less of I think, focus around some of that. And we do have our chamber who represents not just downtown, but broad community and outside areas. But I think consultation is always good and healthy, and we might just be educated to something we don't know. And sometimes small, insignificant grants might have a totality, in the totality of the goal might achieve something that is what we're after. And certainly we want a vibrant downtown, and part of vibrancy in the downtown is feeling secure and having the windows intact and having graffiti removed, et cetera. So I will support this today.
Councillor McGrogan, as a first-time speaker, you can speak next.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to comment on this. It does seem to me to be very kind of open-ended and difficult to envision what exactly this money would be used for. I think we have to acknowledge to start with that almost every department in the city is already working very hard in regards to safety, cleanliness downtown, all the other issues. So as a collective downtown group, so then if we're going to focus on individual privately owned properties, and I think it's a big can of worms. And I always say, how much is this going to cost and who's paying? And this is kind of another one of those. And I'm a little reluctant. I, again, don't mind the exploration if admin has the time to do this, but I'm reluctant right now to think that I would agree with another grant program. So I'll support this as far as getting the information out and kind of understanding a better look or a framework. But I'm reluctant right now I can't really see the vision for what this would look like. Thank you.
Councillor Sharps?
Are you okay with that?
Yes, I was just trying to remember if Councillor Canodal spoke on this issue already. Sorry. Councillor Canodal.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. So I really appreciate the general premise of what Councillor McGrogan just shared. I am concerned about a couple of things. I'm concerned about staff workload and overstepping the capacity that we should have as an organization. Not to say that this isn't, I talk with my hands, sorry. Not to say that this isn't a good idea. I think supporting small business or supporting businesses in the downtown core is important, and I do value the businesses downtown, but I also see the value of ensuring that our resources are effectively utilized so that we can be the most impactful in the most important areas as possible. And I'm not sure that I feel completely aligned with this, just because to me, I feel, and again, piggybacking off of what Councillor McGrogan said, I feel like when I read this, it's not extremely clear what it means, so that means there's going to be a degree of interpretation that's going to have to happen on the other end for staff when they're looking at this. Not to say that we can't clarify and ensure that they know, but there is a degree of gray that I feel when I read this. And then I'm very, very cognizant that the more we get into this realm, it just costs more. So we have to be thoughtful about what are our top goals and how can we make sure that we're aligned to those, 6 pillars, and making sure everything falls under those. Not to say that it doesn't, but I don't feel as strongly tied to this one as some others.
Councillor Sharps is next. I just want to note, point of clarity for public and council, the actual notice of motion that's in our package has background and additional information in it that would also inform the motion. Counselor Sharps?
Thank you very much, and through the chair. So, first, I guess, to me, if we're going to support the first one, we're supporting the second one. And one's nonprofit, one's business. So if you're going to do a scope on or do a survey, pulse survey on just nonprofits and exclude your business community, I don't think that's exactly right. Now, I also want to say, as much as I'm incredibly grateful, I know I'm going to be accused of having some pecuniary interest here, but I'm going to speak to it anyways. So when I look at, I love the fact that Councillor Robbins brought this forward, because I don't believe she's wrong. I believe there's a need. I just don't know if it comes to me as a business owner, and here's why I'm going to say that. In the last 6 months, when Councillor Robbins put this notice of motion out, I went through my Simply Accounting and I pulled up everything I did to clean up graffiti, hire specialty cleaners to get human debris off my property. The graffiti, the broken windows in the last 4 months is $22,000. I really don't think the city wants to be comping my bill. So as a business owner, it sucks. I'm not sure how you keep us downtown when we're going to be paying that. However, maybe we could look at something different. Instead of, like, I've replaced my cameras twice in the last 4 months. So instead of my cameras, why isn't there street cameras? Why don't we do a CCTV program for the community? So Joe Blow walking down the street, so when I lived in Europe, when I walked down the street, I was on a CCTV. It wasn't the business owner's responsibility to do that. So my property, I have my own parking, I have a front door, I have a back door. They're all cameraed, so the people coming to see me are safe. Their vehicles are safe. I can attest to everything that's going around. However, what I can't do is if you're walking by the sidewalk at night, I can't do anything for that. I can't put any more lighting in because, well, electricity is expensive. I'm not going to bling out my building so you feel safe walking by it. Those are just things that are unreasonable from a small business owner point of view. So I would rather see us put some money, if possible, to exactly what she's saying, but to the infrastructure of the community. So the downtown cores, the lighting, the structure. And maybe instead of staff once again trying to do all the legwork, maybe through the business licensing, we could just send out an email survey that can be compiled back a little bit more simply and elegantly. But again, if that was there, I would have put it into it almost every month. And so obviously I'm not going to do that, and I would love to be compensated for my losses, but that's just not reality. It's not for the city to pick up my losses.
Counselor Sharps, given that you mentioned it, I do feel the need to ask if you feel you have a conflict of interest in this case.
No.
All right, City Manager Mitchell.
Thank you, through the chair, recognizing that there is a motion on the table. One other suggestion, just listening to the different voices around the table and agreeing with some of the comments, there is an opportunity if we decide to either defeat this motion and give direction. I do believe that we need more information. First of all, about the various programs in the other communities of our size. What are they doing? Are they working? Are they effective? Touching base with the chamber, the downtown businesses, and also the people that you mentioned on the business license, and finding that information and bringing it back before we commit to a grant program, because I don't think right now we really know if it's needed or not needed. So I do think that it's more prudent to come back with a briefing note to council with that information in compiled form.
Counselor Sharps, and then I'm going to give Counselor Robbins an opportunity to speak.
Just a quick follow-up to that. I agree. Thank you very much for that, City Manager. I guess, ultimately, I just wanted to make sure I was kind of clear here. There is a need downtown. There's absolutely a need downtown. I just don't want it displaced to the wrong area. We could probably multiply the DPU unit times 2. But also at the end of the day, and it's actually a business owner sitting up in the stands that made me think of a conversation that we were having at the last Downtown Collective. At the end of the day, the DPU can go into a location and arrest somebody and take somebody. Sorry, Downtown Patrol Unit, I apologize. The Downtown Patrol Unit's really quite busy, and they go into businesses, and any of us can call them or text them, and they'll go in and they'll help us with somebody that is maybe a little hard to remove from a location, and they get quite aggressive sometimes. And technically, we could probably have 2 of those units down there, so maybe we're funding more through the police. Nobody wants to hear that, but that's just reality. But second to that, you know, I want to be really clear, the DPU can go in, remove somebody, and that's all they can do for about 10 minutes because it's not illegal, right? So you can ticket them for trespassing, and you can ticket them for trespassing, and you can ticket them for trespassing, but it's not a criminal offense. So it's also the bylaw, it's not just the bylaws, it's the way our current laws are. So we just have to make it easier to do business down there. But we can't just all hire our own security and things. So much to supporting this, I just think it's it's not the business owners, it's the downtown streets and the divisions, to me, that need to be looked at. So I'm just supporting what you're saying. I just want to make sure you understand my perspective on that.
Councillor Robbins?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely 2 elements to the motion. I would be happy to hear about the first part of the motion first, and then get that information and decide if I wanted to make the second part of the motion, or if somebody else wanted to make the second part of the motion. So if I may, I could make an amendment to the motion.
You can't, but Councillor Dumanowski or Councillor Hirsch, is that why you're, yeah. Councillor Hirsch?
So at this time, I'd like to make an amendment that city administration consult with stakeholders as presented, research innovative similar programs in other communities, and provide a report to council of options by July 2024, if that works.
I'll second that.
So the intention, again, is to remove the monetary component, just for, again, just to look at. Certainly to do the normative information, get the information on the table, and then look at, let's not prejudge that the option is going to be a grant process. Thank you.
And you intended to continue including the date, July 2024?
I'm just looking at administration to make sure that that's appropriate timeline, so there's a nod. So yes, I'm comfortable with July 2024.
All right, do we have a seconder on the amendment? You have to say it in your mic. Okay. I didn't hear that, sorry. Okay, so now we are just debating the amendment. Councillor Dumanowski.
Your worship, I will support the amended motion. I think the previous motion spoke to that because it did say it's not there anymore, but it did say if approved by council. The wording, this is, okay, there it is. So, and the options to create a downtown enhancement grant with a goal if approved by council. I think that was presupposing that once an adequate or relevant report identifying options came forward, then it would come forward for the potential goal of creating an enhancement grant, again, if approved by council. But I just don't want to lose that. I feel like the amended motion lose that, but if in the context of open conversation and public and community conversation by virtue of TV, newspaper, in other words, we know that that could be a potential goal derived from this, then I will support the amended motion.
Are you on the amendment, Councillor McGrogan? Councillor McGrogan?
Thank you. I just want to, through the chair, I just want to support this amendment as well. I think we're projecting in the other one, this is saying, hey, let's go out and have a look and let's, do an environmental scan, see what it looks like and come back. So I'm really comfortable with this.
Okay, we will have to vote on the amendment. My only concern with both, I guess, either, is that by July 2024, you're already into the summer season, well into the summer season. So the earlier we can come out with programs that mitigate some of the concerns that business owners have associated with safety, I think the better. But we will vote on the amendment, and then we're going to go back into debate on the main motion, whether or not amended. So we'll just vote on this amendment for the moment. All right, so the amendment has been passed, and is there any further discussion on the motion as amended? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion as amended. And that's passed. Moving on to item 10.1 under new business. We have the City of Medicine Hat Environmental Framework Council Presentation Deadline Extension. Councillor Hirsch?
Your worship, I move that council approves an extension from April 30th, 2024 to July 15th, 2024 for the presentation to council of the final environmental framework with related funding requirements.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Councillor Dumanowski?
Your worship, the only, there's no option but to support the amendment to delay the framework. But we, a number of times already today, have indicated the process for the next 2-year cycle of budget starting in April. So we get this July 15th. That means we can't action anything really relative to it until August at the earliest, and it potentially puts or jeopardizes some of the outcomes related to the framework, especially as funding is concerned. So unless we are presupposing things within the initial budget, the timeline would not work well, at least from my point of view. So maybe staff could respond to that.
City Manager Mitchell?
Thank you through the chair. I will let Acting Managing Director Redden speak to this, but we are making sure that we meet the budget envelope, and the timelines are such because of the way the calendar falls, and Director Redden can explain that.
Acting Managing Director Redden?
Thank you through the chair. Yes, at committee it was decided we'd be best to return to a council committee of the whole session with our defined strategies and actions and the related budgetary considerations for 24 and potentially 25 and 26. And then some of those may be out of cycle if we chose to adopt them. And given the timelines to get to council by April 30th, following that March 25th Council Committee of the whole deadline, we'd have very little time to actually take the recommendations back and implement them and then run through admin and committee and back to open council. Therefore, we're currently scheduled to, if we make the March 25th Council Committee of the whole, we'll return back to council by June 3rd.
So am I understanding that we will actually approve the recommendations in March, but the funding requirements won't be approved until July?
We'll run through the chair, we'll run those past you, the budgetary requirements. Now, there may be some discussion on whether we choose to implement some of these actions depending on those costs. So that will happen at that council committee of the whole session, and then we will make our recommendation by June 3rd at open council.
So, but even if, to Councillor Dumanowski's point, we'll be well into budget by July 15th. So whatever funding requirements that are recommended as part of the framework, they will already be built into the budget that is presented to council before July 15th.
Yes, through the chair, recognizing that some of these actions have already been undertaken and have been accounted for in the budget. It's anything that's above and beyond that that may appear as an out of cycle should we choose to adopt it.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Dumanowski?
I think I'm understanding. I'm not, I understand the need to delay it. I understand the timing. Predetermining what should go in a budget before council's adopted it is problematic to me, if I understood it as such. And we know that the framework and the costs associated with these, this framework will not be small change. And so I'm worried about the timing. We've known about this for a long time. I'm not trying to suggest that staff haven't worked hurriedly on this, but the timeline seems to me to be problematic. And I guess I'll end by saying I really feel, and this predetermines or suggests to me that there's a predetermination that we will have to come back inevitably with amendments or alterations to the budget once we're well into it or into it. And I got to say, I've said it before, maybe not as loudly as I'm going to say it is. We've made so many mid-budget amendments in this term, unequivocal to anything I've seen in all the years I've been here. We constantly come back with changes, and I'm gonna struggle with that in the next budget cycle. I'm gonna tell you right now. I'm gonna make it very clear. Once we pass a budget, we pass the budget, unless it's something beyond, an emergency or otherwise. But I don't like creating a budget and then coming. And I'm not saying this is going to do that, but this just became part of the conversation that we're going to come back and say, well, now we have this or we have this. We need to have all this in the foreground so that we can plan accordingly. And when we go to the public at large and we say, here's our plans for the next 2 years, we can honor that short of something that was beyond our scope or of advance notice or was emergent in nature. And so this just concerns me because this won't be insignificant, and it seems to me now we're going to be well into a conversation. We already had conversation on all these meetings we're going to have and the depth of them and the process, and this is going to come kaplunk right in the middle of it and, in my opinion, jeopardize the whole process because this is a small accounting line in the context of a budget. So those are my comments, but I will support it because I don't see any other option to do otherwise.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion presented on screen. That's unanimous. The next item is Rural Renewal Initiative, and we have with us Selena McLean-Moore, Director of Economic Development, and Brady Schnell, Economic Development Officer.
I'll just introduce so Selena doesn't have to come all the way down. So as everybody knows, Council had previously approved the Rural Renewal Stream, and that was done quite some time ago. What we're here for tonight is to appoint a member of Council to the Rural Renewal Committee, and I will turn it over to Brady. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Clark and City Councilors, Administration. As Ann said, the application to Alberta Rural Renewal Stream was approved by City Council in 2022, and the province issued a community designation in January of 2023. Because the community designation is a regional partnership, including the City of Medicine Hat, Cypress County, the Town of Redcliffe, and the Town of Bow Island, a regional steering committee has been created. So it's recommended that the City Council appoint one council member as a representative on the steering committee for the duration of the regional rural renewal program.
I will note that I was asked to sit on the committee and I agreed to do that, and I have been sitting on the committee, the steering committee, and then it came up very recently that it had to go through the procedure bylaw. But there is only, I believe, one more meeting of the actual steering committee before another committee or some iteration of a different committee comes into place. So in my view, it's probably better to wait because we're trying to establish the program before March. Don't want to delay that, but there is another committee that's probably going to be comprised of very similar group of people, but if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so given the nature of the program rolling out behind schedule, the community designation is now been issued 14 months ago, and we are trying to get the program going as soon as possible. So upon my hiring here at the city, we pulled together a steering committee as soon as we could. Our first meeting, December 18th. We've had 3 meetings since December 18th. And in the most recent meeting, we approved the terms of reference for the committee, at which time it became apparent that these appointments should become formalized. While the creation of the program will be complete before March 1st, I do think that the regional steering committee plays a role ongoing into giving feedback as to how it's going, how it's working for the different municipalities. So there will be a pivot from planning and design to oversight. But it's my hope that the representation would be consistent throughout. Yeah.
Councillor Knodel.
Thanks, Mayor Clark. Can I make a suggestion that being that Mayor Clark is the person that sits currently, that she continues to sit as the committee evolves?
Are you making a motion?
I will make a motion. I'll just say it again. I'll make a motion to nominate Mayor Clark. I move that council appoints Mayor Clark as the representative on the Rural Renewal Initiative Steering Committee for the duration of the regional program and as it evolves into the next stages of the committee.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Sharps?
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm actually going to go off on a bit of a tangent here because I can. So last week, I received an email, as did all of council and probably half of, I don't know, Medicinet News and everybody else and their dog, asking me to recuse myself for pecuniary interest. So I'm going to be very clear, I have none. When I first sat on this council, I actually went to Invest Medicine Hat and asked why we're not applying for this program. So whether I do a Canadian experience class, and I think Brady will understand what I'm saying here, and for the rest that don't, I'm just going to try to explain it. Whether I do a federal skilled worker, a refugee, a Canadian experience class, an agri-pilot, the avenue of how I get somebody here does not add funds to my wallet. It's just an avenue. So what I did do when I got the email, I went over my last 2 years' worth of clientele. 60% were physicians, which would not have used this program. They don't need an invitation. One of the things that I found really interesting over my last 2 years' worth of clientele, there's only 2 people here that stayed in Medicine Hat. One of the reasons I had asked for this program when it first came out, because it encourages people to stay in our community. It helps our employers keep people. I do not do a lot of work in the unskilled and the lower skilled. Majority of my work is on high skill and tying some of my recruitment into that. So in the last 2 years' worth of cases that I have done, not one of my clientele would have utilized this avenue. However, will I push some of my HR clientele to this? Absolutely. It probably will never make me a dime, and that's okay, because it will be good for our community. So I want to be very clear. I have no pecuniary interest. If anything, being on council has made me the opposite of rich. Let's be very clear. I've taken a bit of a wage cut being here. So this is not making me rich, nor am I getting any money of it. So if there's any questions, I encourage anybody to ask them to me right now.
All right, we have a motion on the table. Councillor Hirsch?
So I'm just wondering, it's fairly atypical because I know it's a new program that's operating. I don't know if there's any other council members that are interested in participating on this. I know there's a motion on the floor in terms of Mayor Clark, so I appreciate that. And I don't know if you accepting of the nomination or not. You are. So I don't know if there's any other interest by other council members so that we would have a review and really from council's point of view to appoint.
I'm open to, we do have a motion on the table, so we do need to deal with that motion. Councillor Robbins?
Yes, thank you through the chair. I'm supportive of the motion to have Mayor Clark continue. I'll be very interested and perhaps ask if the motion passes, that Mayor Clark would be able to give us updates and council updates, so we all know we're all very interested in this program. But I'm confident that she will do that during her representation on the committee, so I will vote for this motion.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the goal would be to have the minutes of each meeting come through either to open or close council as appropriate.
That is true, yep. On January 29th, the steering committee passed the terms of reference, which states the approved minutes of the committee will go to the respective councils. Yep.
Councillor Hirsch, are you on again?
I am. I just actually have a question. So relative to the steering committee, but the other appointments that are going on, are there terms listed? Is this an ongoing initiative? So I'm just thinking that we would put this into the stream like we do with all our other appointments that talks about, so in this, perhaps it might be we elevate the mayor to be representative for a 2-year term or whatever the term is. I'm just trying to think in terms of putting this back into the stream of what we have from organizational appointments as is. So maybe that's something for you to answer. Is this going to be a long-term, is there a view of that in that regard?
I would suggest, and I know that Brady has already said that he hopes it's consistent, but I would suggest that the term is until our next organizational meeting. Because that's when we normally do our appointments.
Yeah, and that's fine. Yeah, I just want to put some rigidity around the appointment to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I don't know if well, I'm just thinking if you want to, I guess at the end of the day, I could make an amendment, request amendment to, for review and I guess time specific at the next organizational meeting to be held. I think it's in October. Is that correct?
It will be either at the end of October or the beginning of November. I'm not sure if it's
I know we're
already
I know we
scheduled.
try to be time specific, but I would just maybe submit, because we don't have it, thank you, to the next 2024 City Council organizational meeting. Yeah, thank you.
Do we need to vote on the amendment?
Do you need a seconder?
Okay, yes, need a seconder.
I'll second.
Okay.
Your
Go
worship,
ahead,
I have
Councilor
a
Dumanowski.
friendly amendment that we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, if we're allowed to use that term anymore.
Yes, please.
The regional program, it just says this vague language. I think it needs to say the Rural Renewal Initiative Steering Committee, where it says regional program somewhere. That's my friendly amendment.
So I believe the name of the program is the Southeast Rural Renewal Pilot.
I think we've landed on
Southeast Alberta.
Southeast Alberta Rural Renewal is just that, a steering committee.
And then you, if I'm understanding Councillor Hirsch's amendment, you would have to get rid of after committee for the duration of the regional program and as it evolves into the next stages of the committee until but the steering, it's not going to be the steering committee anymore? Is that the issue?
We'll retain the name steering committee. We will.
Okay.
Yep.
So do we have a seconder on the amendments?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dumanowski, did you have an additional item you wanted to speak to?
I did not. However, I believe the part that was taken out was going to be added to the end, was it not? Or did I misunderstand that? The part that you took out, if you copy and paste it at the end, it might make sense, but I think we needed that in there. It's just, we wanted that to be for the, we are talking about as it evolves. Do we want to say it for the duration until the next city council organizational meeting, upon which time, or as it evolves into next stages? I don't know if that needs to be part of it, or is that just a natural connection to the motion without it being there.
So you're suggesting just get rid of for the duration of the regional program?
Well, I think whatever we took out, I think we wanted to word it into the end after the, Counselor Hirsch, you had made a comment around that. I thought that's what you wanted, but it was
Well,
going to come after.
So when
toward
I
the end.
read for the duration of the regional program, it means in infiny, if you will. So I think by putting the timeline, so I'm okay with the deletion of the for duration of the regional program. Well, I think we've already heard that the steering committee going forward, because you're talking about an organizational one that you just concluded, have one meeting left, and you're evolving into this, whatever that iteration's going to be. So is it the Southeast Alberta Rural Renewal Steering Committee?
That's correct.
Okay. So then I'm okay for the deletion of the for the duration of the regional program as it evolves, and then just put until the 2024. Because then it's time specific on the
Yes.
new committee that is just to be struck, so.
And for clarity, the committee also includes representation from Cypress County, Town of Bow Island, and Red Cliff, because they are part of our rural renewal region. I don't have anyone on the speakers list, so we'll vote on the amendment. And that's unanimous, and if there are no further speakers, we'll vote on the motion as amended. And that's unanimous. Are there any other highlights that you wanted to share about the Southeast Alberta Rural Renewal?
As a part of the Rural Renewal Program, we're also operating a Settlement Integration Languages Partnership Funding, which helps welcome and retain newcomers, educate employees, employers in the community on welcoming initiatives. And so I'm happy to report that on March 13th, we will be holding our second community conversation that'll be taking place in Medicine Hat. And so we'll be sure to circulate that invitation throughout the organization.
Councillor Canoto?
Thanks, Mayor Clark. I just want to make a general comment about my eagerness to see this lift off and how it'll benefit our community and those who are really eager to stay here and haven't got the means to stay here because of whatever issues with their, and I'm going to use the wrong terminology, you can give me the daggers, but whether it's a visa problem or immigration problem. So I'm really excited for those people to have a certainty that they can be in the community that they choose.
Councillor Sharps?
I feel like I do need to do this because I really want to make sure, and feel free to jump in and correct me, Brady. But this doesn't get you around the ability, you still have to be eligible for immigration. This gives you a nomination. It is still a long wait time. The province is not exactly fast. I believe it's actually sitting at 18 months. I don't know if that number's come down. It's quite high. You still have to meet all residency requirements. You cannot be ineligible for immigration. There is other programs out there. If you have an ineligibility requirement, this would not be it. So you still have to have the financial needs, meet the permanent residency requirements, have no criminal, all those other things. This is just a really good avenue for employers to keep the people they've already invested in that sometimes don't get the other points, that necessarily maybe don't want to do an LMIA that gets them the 600 points, but you still have to be eligible. Does that make sense? Okay.
Do you have any comments on that, Mr. Schnell?
No, I don't.
Okay. Seeing no further speakers, will give you thanks and have a great evening.
You as well. Thank you.
Item number 11.1, emergency management bylaw amendments.
Thanks, Your Worship. I move that council give first reading to bylaw 4800, a bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend the emergency management bylaw.
I'll second the motion.
And being first reading, we will vote on the motion, or to give first reading. There we go. Councillor Sharps? You may have. That's unanimous. No further motions on that item, so we'll move on to item 11.2, tax sale 2024.
I move that council approves the minimum sale price, reserve bid for applicable properties, and the sale conditions that apply to the public tax sale auction as presented.
I will second that motion.
Any discussion? Councillor Hirsch?
This, not really a question or even just a comment in regards to the item on the floor right now is one that is quite frankly, the last final effort in regards to the tax collection. I think the public needs to understand that this is over many years of dialogue, effort, if you will, to try and find a alternate solution rather than this measure. So I'm supporting it, but just wanted the public to know that it comes with great due diligence. Thanks.
Councillor Dumanowski?
Well, Your Worship, this was on the committee that I sit on. I wasn't able to attend this meeting, but further to what Councillor Hirsch just said, my only question or consideration would be the reserve bid. Again, I'm not qualified to determine what a reserve bid should be for these properties. My only question would be, in light of the current landscape when it comes to property evaluations, what we would call assessed value versus market value, certainly the disparity is probably greater than I've ever seen in all the years I lived here, and that's largely derived by a supply-demand situation. So in plain language, houses are worth far more than probably what they're assessed for based on the fact that there are very few of them out there. So in saying that, when we put a reserve bid, and most of these will be resolved, thankfully, historically are resolved before they go to auction. But if our reserve bid, I mean, I didn't look at these properties, so I have no correlation, but what I see in the real estate world and when I pay attention to it and what the prices are, it's shocking. And so when I see these, I haven't seen numbers like this applied to any residents of Medicine Hat to my recall, and some of these are obviously, if not all of them, are residents. So I'm wondering how we have accounted for that, because it will, if they do go to auction, it will change. I mean, the process is clearly stated and set out. The amount owed to the city is paid off, et cetera, and the rest is given to the owner or the bank or whatever the case might be. But the reserve bids seem unusually low to me, I guess is where I'm going, relative to what the market, especially in Medicine Hat, front page of the News Saturday, said it all. So how did we determine that, and what consideration do we put on that significant supply-demand disparity between current assessed, and market value?
City Manager Mitchell?
I'm going to turn this over to Marty.
Thank you. So we do have Director Barta and Manager Schmaltz online, and so I'll ask likely Manager Schmaltz to respond to that one, please.
Welcome, go ahead.
Hello. Hello. Through committee and through the chair, the reserve bid is based on the assessed value from 2023, as well as the assessed market value as of January. And also we've taken a realtor's assessed market value as well. So they have done a desktop evaluation as well to determine the fair market price. All of those numbers are correlated together, and there is less than 10% discrepancy in the reserve bids that were actioned between the assessment market value and the realtor's market value. We have put a higher rating on the higher price because we want to make sure that the property owners get the best advantage if any of these properties are sold through tax auction process.
Do you have a follow-up, Councilor
Yeah,
Bobnowski?
no, I appreciate that clarity. I'm still surprised, but I appreciate the clarity. I'm pleased to hear that real estate lens was also put on this. Not that we would not have a fair process to determine the value for a reserve bid, but I'm still surprised by the numbers, but I'm satisfied by your response. Thank you.
And to your point, just for clarity, the price that the city receives or for the auction receives, the city is only permitted to take what is owed to the city plus a slight administration fees, and then the rest goes to the owner of the property. Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, thank you very much. We'll vote on the motion. That's unanimous. There are no notices of motion listed in the agenda, and I'm not aware of any. Nope. Any council member reports? None are listed on the agenda. Any councilor reports? Seeing none. As there is no further business, this meeting is adjourned at 8:06 p.m.